So, there is no such thing as rapid aging or fast aging. There's going to be a few rants for the next couple of weeks because when I was writing, I felt kind of ranty. So I hear all the time, especially in Texas or in places like Texas. Man, I really can't get that. There we go. In Texas, because of the weather, we can make 12-year-old whiskey in 2 years. Bullshit. Complete and utter bullshit. That's the end of the video. I don't really know what else to tell you. No, but I'm gonna. It's infuriating to me that people keep perpetuating this myth, and it reminds me of a lot of this is such a side topic, but when Roger Sperry wrote about brain lateralization, he was talking about how the initiation of action can begin in left or right brain. And when he was interviewed by journalists, they wrote, people are right-brained or left-brained. And Roger Sperry went, no, that's not what I said. And he spent most of his life fighting against the misunderstanding of brain laterality by journalists, who then perpetuated it across the world, and now tons of people write things and talk about, well, this is more of a right brain, left brain situation, and it's bullshit. That's not how the brain works. You're both brained all the time. Unless, you're part of the tiny part of the population who had to have a surgery and separate the left and right brains to stop seizures. I think what keeps happening is mostly some whiskey people who don't understand aging have perpetuated this idea that you can rapid age things. The only people who have ever said this are people who don't understand how whiskey ages. And then journalists write about it, and then it floods through the market, and then people read it, and then people get into the whiskey industry, and they talk about, well, rapid aging, the climate, no. And they're all just perpetuating this cycle of bullshit. So here's what I mean. 3 things happen in a barrel while whiskey is aging, and we already talked about this in another episode. Additive, which is the barrel adds things to the whiskey. Subtractive, which means the char layer of the barrel, and oxidation remove things from the spirit. And transformative, which is a creation of whole new chemical complex structures due to interaction of all of those things, oxidation, and time. Time over time, right? So you can alter some of these things on purpose, right? You can put wood chips in, or char something differently, or pressurize a barrel, and you can ramp up, or in a hot weather climate like Texas, or India, or Taiwan, or Arizona, you can ramp up the weather extremes and really accelerate the additive properties of a barrel, right? You can also filter, and through filtering, alter the subtractive elements of what would happen during aging. But the one thing you cannot do is truly accomplish the impact of something that only comes from time and transformative creation of new chemical structures. I'll explain that in a second. First, let's drink some whiskey. Okay, so this is Amrut, and we've done a few versions of Amrut. This is an Indian whiskey, the Indian single malt. This is their classic one. The distillery itself used to be called something like Distillery Project or something like that, something really obscure before it became the single malt distillery that we sort of know today. It started in 1948 in Bangalore, and but didn't make whiskey or single malts till 1982. So for roughly 40 years, they sort of made molasses-based spirits, but distilled spirits still. Now, India doesn't have a lot of regulation on whiskey and what whiskey means, and so there can sometimes be spirits coming out of India that are labeled whiskey, but are actually mostly vodka or even rum-based, or but then have some grain impact, and anyway. But Amrut and Paul John are both legitimately making whiskey as, in a way, the rest of the world would consider it to be whiskey. And they've now been doing it for 40 years, 50 years, right? Which is longer than the North American single malt scene. Did they make it, the nose on this is interesting. Did they make it in, well, let's talk more about that in a second. First, let's do the nose. Immediately, this is just classic single malt to my nose. It's a little simple, but it's very, it reminds me of a slightly shiny version of Glenlivet, or no, Glenmorangie, because it has a sort of orange citrusy kind of vibe. Behind the sort of grain and barley notes, it smells a little young. It's very vanilla and sweet. It's very bright and shiny. A little bit of fruit, but it's all very covered in vanillins and shininess. Oh, okay, nice. Ooh, whoa, hang on. It starts as that sort of like brittle vanilla icing meringue sweetness, and then it sort of goes into this slight phenolic rubbery note on the aftertaste. I would think that's probably the ramp up of the aging environment, but who knows? It's very simple, but it's not bad. It's not faulty. It's just a solid budget whiskey, which is cool. I think one of the reasons I got onto the subject of today's video was because somewhere in one of the write-ups a journalist wrote, they're in India, so they can make 10-year-old whiskey in only 3 years because of the Indian climate. And I was like, that's not how that works. Okay, so I'm gonna add a little water and I'm gonna return to ranting. When you, I'm add a little more, what is this, 40? 46, nice. The magic and the alchemy of aging whiskey is that we know that if we sit and wait on something, certain chemicals will break down and certain chemicals will increase. We don't really know how exactly, but we know how to alter it. It's like, I think there's a medicine, maybe it was aspirin, where it's a funny thing if you go research it. We know exactly what it does and in what quantities we can make it do things, but we don't know how it accomplishes it. It's a very weird, bizarre thing that someone told me. I thought they were joking, and then I went and looked it up, and it turned out to be true. In whiskey, we sort of know that different proofs can create certain things. We sort of know that if you leave time, you'll get this chemical degradation of the spirit, and when it degrades, it comes apart, and it creates new things, and then those new things interact. And so what happens is, when you have a threefold intertwined system, if you let it sit and move along, then time interacts with certain things in certain ways. And if one of those gets accelerated, then by the time the transformative creation would occur for this thing in Scotland at like year 8, you start to see these things happen. Well, if we wait till year 8 in Texas, the chemical structure that time is playing with is completely different. And so it might create those chemical structures, but it's gonna not taste anything like how it does it when it's in Scotland, because the chemical compounds it's oxidizing and playing with are already different. And so we desperately need to get away from this idea that there is an objective reality called whiskey aging, and certain climates have figured it out, and certain climates are trying to rush it. That's not how that works. What happens is this: things age. And depending on their environment, they age differently. I don't care what Glenlivet does. They can't open a production facility in Texas and create the Glenlivet 12 you know and love. They can't do it. Not even with climate-controlled warehouses, you could not recreate that, right? And that is fine. And we need to quit arguing over this. It all comes down to this idea that for some reason, age is the most important thing in whiskey. And that's not true. Taste is the most important thing in whiskey. That's it, right? Taste. The only thing that matters is taste. Who cares how you got there? If it tastes good, then you've done something worth doing. Now, is there a grand adventure in trying to figure out in the state of Texas how to get more time? Absolutely. This is why all the bigger distilleries, craft guys from Balcones to Amrut to Still are playing around with larger barrel profiles and barrel proofing and playing around with ingredients to try to buy more time for the oxidation aging impact on the whiskey, to create those things that only time creates. And they're trying to do it with playing with what chemicals are available and how much the additive impact is happening, and that's really great, right? Some people really, really like super oaky, wooden tasting whiskey. They do. I've met them. They're out there. And for those people, they don't mind 4-year-old whiskey in small barrels because they're like, yeah, turn up that additive. That's fine. Who cares? So the real question is, how do you react to somebody who starts perpetuating the rapid aging myth? You say nothing. That's the answer. There's no place in a generic public scenario to shame someone for something so complex that they were probably just taught incorrectly. Just, you leave it alone. You don't say anything. Now, if they work for you, or if you work with them, or if you're friends with them, then, maybe it's time to have an honest conversation about aging. If they're interested. As we always teach the Psalms, when do you talk about this nerdy stuff? And the answer is never, unless asked. And even then, tread gently. Because people are gonna ask what they think is a simple question, and 30 minutes later, as you're pointing out your pie chart with a stick, they're gonna be like, okay, I get it, it's fine, I just wanted to drink whiskey. So, as always, be gentle with people, but for the love of God, quit perpetuating this stupid myth of rapid aging. There is no such thing. Now, on the water, made it way more fruity and mulchy and barley-esque. Makes me think it's even younger than I thought it was. Oh, and it brought a nice little pepper. Ooh, with a little water. I like this a lot. I'm a fan of a really good budget single malt. This competes with anything I've had from Scotland, and as a simple, good vanilla bourbon barrel forward type single malt, that's solid effort. An effort. They've been doing it for 50 years, 40 years. It's not an effort, it's a thing. And they're doing a good job. Not my favorite thing, not going to change my life, but I like it. So be nice to people, quit talking about rapid aging, and I'm really glad you're here. Cheers. If you want to rapid age the numbers on this channel, you could like and subscribe.